It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, I'm very, very excited to have this guest on. It is somebody that has been suggested to me from Headless plenty of times, and a few other people actually have suggested to have this guest on. And I could not be happier to finally get Jin the Ninja on. What is up, Jin? Thank you very much for coming on, and let everybody know what your deal is and who you are.
Sure. So thanks, NYP, for having me. It's kind of like amazing. It's like the apotheosis kind of to come on this show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I am a semi-retired magician, we'll say, who had a chance encounter when I was 13 with a Kala Chakra initiation. And then I kind of went about my life and kind of got into more left-hand path practices. And then about 2018, I kind of really had life things happen, and I sort of came back to the Dharma. But obviously I had to kind of navigate that path, as well as when you engage in left-hand path practices, it can screw things up for you. And so I felt like I had to learn how to rectify some of the things that I had done. So that's basically my story.
Oh, very nice. Okay. Awesome. And you have, and in today's topic, we're going to be trying to we're going to be tying Tantra to Kabbalistic stuff, and Qabalah. And I do know that you have done some extensive stuff on this in the past. It is not, it's not, you don't have a podcast of yourself, but if you want, you can plug and let everybody know where they can find the stuff that you've done in the past. And maybe give a little bit of an explanation of what you've done as well.
Okay. So there's a syncretic grouping of 10 goddesses who are called the Maha Vidya, which means just greater wisdom. So Maha means greater, Vidya means wisdom. And usually, especially in Buddhism, although this isn't necessarily true for Indian Tantra, the female principle is considered to be the embodiment of wisdom. And the male consort is considered to be the embodiment of method. So like ritual method or exterior method. But the female is the interior wisdom. So these are greater wisdoms. So it comes in a very syncretic time when different kinds of practices were coalescing, and it really takes place in Nepal. But it doesn't just take place in Nepal. It was it's a complex, a tantric complex that spans through the Himalayas into China, into South India, into Pakistan. So it's a kind of a wide-ranging, we'll say, complex. But there are different schools, but there's this one concept of the 10 goddesses. So I was listening to this show and hearing you talk about the Qabalah a lot. And then I realized that I kind of understood and could see and remember some of the colors, maybe the textures of the spheres, maybe the relationships between spheres, but I understood it through the goddesses. So I kind of started mapping it out, just putting it on like a tree, seeing where I could go with it. Love that. And then I started using the astrological associations. So obviously when you're at, I started from the bottom. So that's how I kind of mapped it. Was I started at Malkuth, because the idea is you start as like a householder. So you start as like kind of a child looking upwards without the words to describe the universe, but you learn through the action of doing. So that's kind of how I conceived of it. So then, you kind of flow through the paths and the spheres, and I tried to figure out who could go where. And then at the top at Kether and Chokmah, I realized, well, there's no traditional planetary association for them, but there is a tantric planetary association, which has to do with the dragon. So the top is Rahu, who is the head of the dragon of the eclipse, and Ketu is at Chokmah, who is the smoky tail of the dragon. So I was just also looking at the contemporary associations for those spheres. So I also came up with contemporary astrological kind of correspondences that I felt would match the goddesses that I put in those spheres as well. So I got invited on Subconscious Realms with General Lee, shout out to him. And I didn't really know it was going to be a series. I just kind of like went in I thought it was going to be one and done, but then he kept inviting me back. And then it's now turned into 9 episodes, but it's going to eventually be 11 part series. I've almost recorded all 11. And, wow. And I've done a bunch of other interviews. Like we just interviewed Vinny from the Ghoulcast, and I'm going to have my own RSS feed and all of that. So anyways, you can check that out. And then I was just on an episode of Deplorable Janet. And that episode literally just dropped like maybe an hour ago. So people can go listen to that. And yeah.
Awesome. Good stuff, man. Yeah, I highly suggest if this stuff interests you, go back and look in and listen to his stuff if he's covering, sphere by sphere. I highly suggest to listen to that. I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot more detail in there than you'll get out of this 1 or 2 part episodes,
I'll try and pack it in, though. I'll try and make it worthwhile.
Thank you. And then I guess, like we said, we're going to get into some of the cosmology, and some of the stuff behind, I guess, before we get into Qabalah, which I prefer and appreciate. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And here we go. This is, and just let me know when to move on. I can control the slides. Just tell me to move on. So, thank you very much.
So I thought the reason why I think this is a really interesting image is that, so let's just say who it is first. So it's Vajrakellaia with his consort, who's named Dipta Chakra. So this is obviously a Buddhist iconography. It's a Nuwari, meaning it's from Nepal, so it's more syncretic. So it could be understood as being both part of like the Indian Tantra or part of like Vajrayana Buddhist Tantra. So he has an Indian identity. His name is Skanda, and his wife also has an Indian identity, and her name is Kumari. So Skanda is kind of special because he is the sun. So that's what Kumara means. It's the sun. So he is the sun that is produced when the upward facing triangle, so the Shiva, and the downward facing triangle, the Shakti, so the female energy, they meet and they create Dharmadaya, which means ultimate reality. So it's like the hexagram. So when those 2 triangles coalesce, they become him. And he is very unique because he is the god in Indian Tantra. Obviously in Buddhist Tantra, has similar qualities, but they're not exactly identical. But he is the god of locks and keys, logic.
That sounds like Janice.
And war.
Damn.
So one thing, I know you did a long form series on the chakras. So the chakras are not really my specialty, but he is very important because I don't know if you covered this, but in the story of the chakras, he throws away the Tantra. So he throws away all of the magical texts. He throws one booklet of them into the supernal ocean, where they are swallowed by a giant fish. 400 years later, there's a great yogic sage named Matsendranath. So Matsendranath also refers to someone who's swallowed by a fish, sort of like Jonah and the whale. He is one of the 9 Nath yogis. So they were a grouping of 9 yogis in the 1200s who, they weren't tantrics. There's only 2 of them who were initiated into tantric practices, but they kind of reinvigorated the chakra system and sort of the Indian medical system. So we do have elements of that in Tibetan Buddhism as well, but we only use 5 chakras instead of the 7. Like the 7 that's more well known in contemporary practice.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So he used to be a fully left-handed deity only. After he threw the tantras into the waters, he became almost he's still very much worshipped in South India as a Tamil god named Murugan, but he is not worshipped in the north. And his spear is very important because it is the spear that opens the locks and the keys. So when we show the image of the Sri Chakra, which is a series of 5 downward-facing triangles and 4 upward-facing triangles. So when you see the image together, it makes 64 triangles. So that will be a very important concept for later. But his spear can open and close all the triangles in that configuration.
You know, not to put you on the spot, if you don't mind me asking, you did mention that not in the north it wasn't recognized. Do you have an idea of why you think, I guess, the change?
So I'm kind of interested in looking at why that is, because there's been a lot of that, but I think that there's a very normative kind of Indian history of the Huns. There was a group of Huns called the Alchon Huns. They pushed from Persia, Turkestan, like northern Asia. They pushed into India, and they had a solar lunar bull cult. So very Shiva-like, if people are familiar with Shiva iconography. Not Shiva as a tantric deity, but Shiva as more of a normative deity riding the bull with the moon on his crown, and the water is flowing down from heaven. So I think that the idea is the son can overtake the father because Shiva kind of abandons our world. That's kind of the more Shakta ideal, the more goddess-oriented idea, that Shiva is the godhead, but he kind of abandons the world to go live on the Mahashmashana, which is the carnal ground of ultimate reality, which I placed in Dath, because I just think that kind of makes sense. He's kind of like sitting there meditating, his eyes are closed. It's a very important idea because he sometimes can open his eyes, and then that's not always the best result. But so I think that they pushed Skanda north, Skanda south. And I think that the Buddhists also obviously preserved his left-handed practices, and he becomes apotheosized in the form of the Vajrakilaya, who's the image, the blue image, but it's also a knife. So it's a 3-pointed knife, and it's considered, Skandas in Buddhism are also, besides his name, are also considered to be there are 5 aggregate afflictive emotions. So, but there are 3 main ones from the older texts. So it's aversion, meaning like fear of death, ignorance, and desire. So he kind of is able to purify those. So he's considered to be a very purifying practice, and he also overcomes demons. That's kind of his thing, you could say.
That's really interesting.
So it's kind of like a wand, I guess, if you want to relate it to like a contemporary Western thing. It's as important as that. And then, so the swastika is really important because I think it's very misunderstood, because people will say, oh, it's for luck, it's for this, or it has like the negative connotations of World War II. But really it means it's the time wheel. It's the wheel that spins on the axis of time. And people will make a big deal about it going clockwise or counterclockwise. But when you see it depicted in iconography, it's usually depicted on its axis in Buddhism. So this is strictly Buddhism. But in Indian, they will be the clockwise, because that is the auspicious direction. So you want time to move in an auspicious way. So bring in fortune. So there's a way to worship it in Indian Tantra where you put flowers and sandalwood paste in each of the 4 quadrants. So this inverse one, we'll call it, is actually from the Bon religion. And I'm not going to talk about Bon, but it's really, really interesting because they purport it to be a Turkish religion from 24,000 years ago. That's their own dating. That's not necessarily like the correct date, but that's what they think of their own practices, that it's kind of like this pre-Buddhist Buddhism. So I just think it's really interesting to kind of compare the two because it still exists in Tibet. So it's now been incorporated as like a sixth school into Buddhism. So you can move on if you want,
okay.
MYP, to the next slide.
Thank you. Here we go.
Yeah, so
it kind of refers back to what you were saying earlier too.
Exactly.
Love it.
And if you remember, I know you had a show on Gnosticism. It was a long time ago, but they were talking about the Yazidis. So you see the familiarity if you know the Yazidi imagery, which is they worship the peacock god. So this is Skanda sitting on his Vahana, who's a peacock. The Vahana just means mount. And this is the Dharmadaya. So it's the Shiva, the upward male energy, and the Shakti, the downward female energy. And when they create, it creates Skanda, the sun. So you can see there's kind of a triune aspect that is sort of perennial, we'll say. Perennial to Tantra, but there's other formulations. It doesn't just have to be Shiva and Shakti and Murugan. It can be, there's other kinds of formulations that happen. Like there can be a formulation of understanding this, if you want to compare it to the Kabbalah spheres, you could say that Vishnu, so Vishnu takes 10 forms. He takes more than that, but he takes 22 forms actually, but there are 10 forms reduced down for the goddesses. So for the 10 goddesses, there are also 10 forms of Vishnu, and he can also appear in the spheres. But he's a lesser character. He's considered a Viras, so a hero. So he is the Virasic path, the path of the heroes. So he's not necessarily the god head of the spheres, if you want to say it like that. He is more of a character that appears in the spheres.
You know, I don't know if maybe this is a way to try to explain it, but I have often thought that, I mean, even though the gods change, I do think like the hero's path, like it would start with like, I think that's Tahuti would start it off, and then you will get into different archetypes and gods to continue it. Is that kind of like something that you're like maybe with this, how like maybe does the character kind of change in form or time?
Yes. So he particularly, Vishnu is God as space. So we should also refer back to like the Aristotelian dialectic that was happening in the 3rd century. So it's the assignation of good qualities to God. So people who are familiar and go back and listen to Robbie did a great series on this exact topic. And they were assigning qualities to God. So they would assign space, time, light, dark, all of those. So if you want to break it down in those ways, Vishnu becomes God as space. Vishnu is also within the Tantric idea, he's also the god that dies. So he becomes Narayana, the sleeping god. So sometimes he will be sleeping on, well, there are 3 oceans. Well, there's more than 3 oceans, but we'll stick with the 3 because I think that's a more understandable way to describe it. But he can sleep on the Chthonic Ocean, he can sleep on the Milk Ocean, and he can sleep on the freshwater ocean at the very top. So, and he will have 7 serpent crown behind him. And so you can sort of see that he has some Ahriman-like qualities, but he isn't evil. He just is a flawed human character. So for a tantric, you're looking at it as, yes, he embodies the flawed traits of humanity, but we should try and overcome them. However, if you're thinking of it in a more esoteric way, you can also say the avatars of Vishnu create a ring in a mandala, so like a sort of a conceptualization of a shape or a fortress, and then you place the gods and different deities within the fortress in different kinds of configurations. Similar to like, I mean, people can look it up. It's like a Kala chakra. It kind of looks like a microchip in a way. You can see there are rings and there are different squares, and so that's exactly the same idea. You just place different characters in it. So he goes on the outer ring of greater heroes. So he's not the god of the core. He's not placed in the central part, although there is obviously in normative Hinduism, he is like the main character. And obviously if you follow like Krishna or Hare Krishna, obviously Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. And if people are interested, Krishna appears in Bana with Kali. So that's who is kind of like the pairing for that sphere. So he appears there, but then Shiva, even though he's sleeping, he can also manifest, and he manifests as time. But he is the consort. Shiva is the consort, whereas Vishnu is just sort of a tertiary character in the play. But Buddhism actually doesn't really understand him to be as prominent as he is in Hinduism. We'll just say that. But he can also be understood to be the dragon. So there is a dragon in Buddhism who's more important than, per se, the dragon in Indian Tantra. But he's also understood to be Vishnu. So I'll just say that there is a kind of like a connection that one can make. And it's not just like a syncretism. It's actually like understood as part of there's multiple. So one of the famous stories of the Puranas, which are the kind of exterior texts, kind of like maybe remixes of the earlier Vedic stories or the earlier Upanishads. So the Puranas kind of narrate the story of the churning of the supernal waters. And so if you follow all the Puranas, which are written, it's probably spanning like a 700-year period from about 1 CE till about 700 CE, they relate 3 churnings of the supernal waters. So I've heard a lot of the concept of like there's been 3 turnings of the wheel of time. I've heard that a lot of conspiracy people, occult people talk about that. So the Puranas, even though they're an exterior text or an outer text, they do relate that story. So he plays a very important role, as well as the dragon plays a very important role in those stories. So if you understand it in a more metaphysical way, him as the dragon completely makes sense.
No,
so
I get that. Yeah, I get it more as like a beastly or a male energy, especially with fire being associated with it.
100%.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. If you don't mind me asking, and don't mean to put you on the spot here, with this photo with the snake in there, what do you think that's the snake? What think's up with that?
So there are 7 dragon kings, Naga kings, of the different. So we'll just break it down like this. So just like the hexagram has like 6 quadrants, we'll say, there are also 6 planes to one reality. So we inhabit a plane as humans. Animals inhabit a plane. There's also a ghost plane. There's a god plane. And then there's a hell plane. But Nagas are considered to live in a subtle realm. So they can understood to live under the earth. Sometimes that's one way to describe it, very frequently, or in the waters. So they will sometimes be said to inhabit both the animal realm and the human realm. So there are 7 primary Naga kings, just like there are 7 luminaries in the sky. And they rule specific, I guess, kinds of knowledges, or maybe you could say it as spaces, different kinds of conceptual ideas. Sorry, go ahead.
When you started, like when you mentioned how they attribute to planets, did you find that easier to then attribute it to Qabalah?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, maybe that's an incorrect way. But
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying with that. With certain spheres, I think it can be a little iffy, but I think that's pretty impressive. That's a good way to do it.
I mean, it gives you a map.
Yeah.
No, it gives you a map for the first 8 spheres at least, or for like if you're working, like I worked from Malkuth to Bana, let's say that. It gives you, there's a clear sort of astrological map, I think, that you could very easily make and say that that's not a problem. And then it's when you get to the top other 3 then it's a challenge.
Yes.
But I think that I can make a good case for my correspondences to work. So that's what I'll say about that.
Awesome.
So you can go on to the next slide if you want, YP.
Sure. There we go.
So there you go. You can see the 10 avatars of Vishnu. So I'm not going to talk about them, but they could honestly be like, I could do an hour on each avatar of Vishnu and how they relate to the goddess, because they are just like how I've often heard you say there are 4 layers to the Sephira. So there's actually more layers in Tantra, and you could say there are 7 layers, but you could also say there are 9 layers, and you could also say there are 11 layers. And I'm not saying that to be funny. That is really the truth. I mean, that is how it's conceived of. Like, the Vishnu has 22 forms. That is obviously going to sound magical for people. Mm-hmm. Ganesh, who's the elephant-headed son of Shiva and Shakti, he has a form that has 22 arms. He also has 32 forms that he takes in a tantric conception. So you can see that there's a lot of overlap just at the base, just like giving the background. There seems to be something there. And that's what I kept seeing, is that there's something there. It doesn't seem like it's just me matching things that don't necessarily culturally go together. It felt like I was doing something that fit together already. That's just my opinion. Okay, and then next you have the Adi Buddha. So yes, I did sneak in a little bit more Buddhism, but obviously I'm a Buddhist, so that's how I kind of conceive of it. So if you want to be really you want to give like a soteriological goal for climbing the tantric tree in a Buddhist way, this would be the soteriological goal. This would be the point of ejection. So it would be after Kether. So you would push yourself off from Kether and then unify with the Godhead at beyond the tree.
Do you think the white and the blue have anything to do with kind of going up?
100%.
Yeah.
Because she, just like in the Gnostic story, she is the consort who looks over her left shoulder when she hears the cries of her devotees, which is us, obviously, and she falls all the way down the tree. And in fact, her body comprises material reality. So in the Tantra conception, this is true for Buddhism as well as Indian Tantra, we exist on her breast. So the nipple in the center is called Mount Meru, which is kind of like it's kind of the mystical, the celestial mountain, the mountain at the center of the world. And in Buddhism, they often call it Jambu Vipa, which is like referring to a world tree or a world island. So I just thought he's an interesting character, because even though I'm going to talk about the spheres using the goddesses and in more of a Shakta Tantra way, which means more focused on the goddess as the Godhead, I just thought that's also an interesting way, because really her goal, even in Shakta Tantra, is to unify with Shiva or Bhairava or whoever you conceptualize as the male consort. Her set state is unification. She just gets distracted. And also people can interact with her in specific ways that make her more distracted, or she can become fixated on things she finds pleasurable. But one thing I've found different is that at the inner core of every sphere, she can be the complete Godhead of her own. And just like in the picture, she's always white in the inner core. So I know Cordovero also made the case that all the cores of the spheres are also white in their truest core. So I felt that was very similar as well.
I could even see that, I guess, with his hands too. That would even have
100%. And you have to think he represents he's blue in the picture, but he's also blue-black. So he's like the color of the night sky. So when they combine, they're still a turquoise color. Turquoise in Sanskrit, like kind of cosmology, is really a white. not so much. It's like turquoise is considered to be more of the perfection of all the colors. It's like, it's pristine. It's like the color of lightning. So that's more of a whiter sky color. It's not necessarily blue or turquoise. Like people, we look at it like that, but really it's white. So when you see turquoise in Indian things or Buddhist things, that's really a white color. And the blue, the dark blue, is really the black. So we can go to the next one if you want, Murphy.
Let's do it. Here we go.
So this is a really cool one, I think, because so there you can see Shiva. So this is Shiva by Rava. So Shiva, as I said, he's sleeping in the carnal ground of the world. So that's kind of the tantric conception. There's two important conceptions, although there's more than two. But really, we live on the great carnal ground of the world. And we just don't know it because we begin as the bride or the child, and we don't have conceptual meanings to assign to the things. Everything that we see in the universe, we don't understand yet. And it's hidden behind something called Maya, which is like the illusion of the world. But why the goddess is really important is she is considered to be the one who's able to touch the strings of fate, touch the strings of the play, the lila. That's what we call in Sanskrit. It's like the divine play. It's a cycle that continues over and over. Sometimes you'll see different characters, but generally it's like a perennial thing. And you have different characters are more important in different yugas and different kalpas, so different ages. So this is God as time. So when God delineates out into time, he becomes the Ashta Bhairava, so the 8 Bhairavas. So, but there's actually 9 because, as you can see, there's a central image. So you'll find this interesting, I think. He has his mount is a dog.
Oh, I love it.
And he has another form called Batuk Bhairava, who's a little boy riding a black dog. So you could say that the image in the center is at Dath, but really when you're thinking of like the Bhairavas, they really emanate from Kal Bhairav. So Kal Bhairav just means the ferocious time king. So Mahakala, I'll use them interchangeably. So they really emanate from him. So you could also think of them as different times in the play, different times in the story. And so he kind of controls the goddess in a specific way, or she can control him in a specific way and put him in specific orders. So by ordering things, she can order kind of like how the flow of the cycle of creation and destruction goes. So they kind of have this interplay, Shiva and Shakti, that they sort of control the strings of the universe at different times in the story. I think that's a good way to understand. But you can see he has a different mount for every sort of form, and then he would expand outwards, obviously 8 times, and then there's 9. But then there's also Batuk, so then there's 10. And then there's also this other form called the Panchamukha Shiva, who he has 5 heads. And from each 5 heads speaks one of the gross elements of creation. So fire, earth, air, wind, and void. Yes, void. That's right. So just like Yate Vate, I thought that's quite interesting as well. But the goddesses don't really fit per se that formula. And I'll give one example is Hod. So I know that I've heard you often say that it's the prince. It's like, it's the female can't manifest in the fire. But for that sphere in Tantra, she is really the goddess of fire and flowers. So I think that's quite interesting. And she also has 3 forms. So she can manifest as the queen, she can manifest as the princess, and she can also manifest as she is the goddess of the will. So she manifests as like a beautiful woman as well, kind of like a maiden figure. So then this other image that's beside the 8 Bhairavs these are the Ashta Matrikas. So these are the 8 mothers is what Matrika means, but they are the goddesses of the Pleiades. So why I include them is because it's another kind of formulation of the female godhead. And it's an older system of Tantra. So it predates like the first Tantric text, is this worship of the goddesses of the Pleiades. So I think that they're really interesting, and some of them are Mahavidyas. And when we get further and we look at the Yogini temples, I have pictures of that. They are also Yoginis. So they are also within the greater collection of 64. And I've also come to know now that there are some people count 64 stars in the Pleiades. So I think that's very interesting. So we can go to the next one. Sorry, go ahead, MYP.
I think even the 6 and the 4, again, like when I talk about like Tahuti's path, the Hermit card falls, I think, if I'm correct, between 6 and 4. And it's just like I do think that is like that number has something to do, I think, with even the projection up the tree.
I 100% agree. 100% agree. So this is the 2 pictures, and it's the same character, even though they look totally quite different. So it's Chandika, but it's in Chandika in 2 different times of her story. Just like we said, there are 9 Time Lords. So this is Chamunda. So this is the first image where she's sitting on the skull throne, and she's in birthing position. So she's bleeding, like in menstruating position. So she's bleeding out the blood ocean where Malkuth would float. So we float on the world island or the world. And so that is the ocean that directly surrounds Malkuth in the Tantric conception would be a blood ocean. So she forms the blood ocean. And you could also say she's very similar to like a Lilith character, or maybe like an Ashira or an Astarte. And I do actually think that you can make an entomological connection and sort of like a linear history. But she is not really like those goddesses, because the way Tantra understands the goddesses is in different stages of their consciousness. So she would be considered to be like a low goddess in the other conceptions. But Tantra considers her to be a fully enlightened being, because she was subjugated in the 8th century by a Tantric sorcerer. So who blinded her. I think that's also very interesting, since you just did the eye series. So he blinded her of her worldly eyes, and she only can open her 3rd eye. But she is considered to be the queen of all the matrikas, so the queen of all the yoginis and the queen of all the Pleiades stars. So then you see her in a different conception where she takes on more of a younger form, which also can arise on Netzach, which is in Shakta Tantra, so Goddess Tantra. Netzach is really perhaps the most important sphere, because it's considered to be like the sphere where she can fully manifest without externalities. Like she can just be fully in herself. She doesn't have to be married to Shiva. She can have her kids and she can populate the rest of the tree, but she can also just self-manifest there.
I could see that with Netzach, not to get too much into it, but I mean, I could see like the maiden going there, and that would be like a woman who's, ready to give birth. And you do, Kabbalistically, I think like you kind of get like there's something I think about like a prism or a rainbow kind of coming into play. Not to get into it too much in that area, and like in my opinion, I mean, just even from podcasting and just if you want to start playing with colors and post production and all this stuff. Adding color to stuff will make things seem to have a lot more detail.
100%.
And I think that starts to get into the whole vision aspect of making something more real, regardless if it is or not.
So, okay, so let's do a little color.
Like it's really adding to the whole visual. Like, it's
100%.
giving you detail to really, like, how you said before about it's almost like she gets shiny object syndrome.
Yes. She
well,
100%
the color, going from the Wizard of Oz when he went from black and white into color, that was really like, oh wow, this seems so fucking real now. You know, because now you can give depth with color. You can start making things shade and have depth and look like they're not like a cardboard cutout anymore.
So she is the emanating goddess of creation in that way, if we want to say material creation. So, but more associated with natural phenomena. Obviously, she has warlike qualities. She has occult-like qualities. And in Buddhism, she's not really considered to be in that kind of Venus, Netzach area. She's more considered to be a middle pillar goddess, and that's like a whole other explanation, but I'll leave it at that. But when she descends from the sky is seen to be bleeding red. So when she descends, it's red. And then and I also have pictures of this, so we'll hit it when we hit it, but she becomes, when she lands on the earth, she causes discord. That's kind of her thing. It's very discordant. It's like Eris-like, I've always thought. And in the Buddhist conception, she can also be a werewolf goddess. So I know everybody loves that, so I always make sure to throw that in.
That's funny. It makes it so much more interesting, right?
So
you said some interesting stuff about, you said how she could be warlike goddess, and you said almost like a middle pillar type goddess. I've said it before, and I know at least when it comes to talisman, again, just because of the colors that is suggested for, ceremonial magic, if you're looking at, Crowley or Stephen Skinner's tables or, anybody else who has tables, they're going to, show you the colors and flashing colors. Green and red, if you are using Netzach, which would be green sphere, your flashing color is going to be red, which would be Gabur, and that would be more warlike. Or if you're using the red sphere, Gabur, your flashing color would be green, and that would be Netzach. There is some sort of relationship, and connecting the two, you have in the middle pillar, because you're going from one side to the next. So maybe it's more of like you're seeing both spectrums in a sense. Yes,
that's exactly, because she is sort of the one. So this is the interesting thing. It's not really polytheism. So I'm sort of giving a spoiler for the end, but it's not really polytheism. She's really the whole thing, but she doesn't know it yet.
I've said that before. I do think, silly as it sounds, sometimes I think there's a lot less actual different gods and just different names and different forms for their story and time.
I'm totally with you. That's what I see. That's what I've experienced myself.
It almost makes more sense because, to me, the way I look at it now.
No, and that's also the story. It's like she descends to Earth. Yes, she descends with 64 yoginis, but she really is the one who bursts them all into creation. So aren't they all also her? So she lands on the hell worlds. So she lives in the hell worlds, but she also gives rise to other forms of herself. You could say that she is the upasika. She is taking the sorcerer or the magician's path upwards together. You could also say that. So that's what the Shakta Tantra narrates, is like the goddess's story, instead of it being focused on like the gods and just like how they like appear in the sphere, and they kind of like are only partly the sphere, but they're not the whole thing. You could say she is the whole thing. However, it depends on your sect of Tantra, and there are different sects. But there are some that are very focused on one of her forms called Kamakya. So we'll also see a picture of her later, but I just will point that out now.
Sometimes I do wonder, like we were saying before, maybe like the same characters. I think you'll have a female and a male, and I do think like kind of like what you're getting, in my opinion. Like if you take Tahuti again, or you can even go with Raphael, but I'm thinking Tahuti because of the caduceus. In my opinion, what you're seeing is like a timeline of those two energies getting twisted, like a twist tie, basically. There's an entanglement, I think, coming down the tree. So then I think going back up the tree is kind of like an untanglement of the problem. And I think sometimes maybe like in this symbolism, sometimes like it could have a bunch of different things. Like I'm saying, one side, both sides are in this actually. Both, it's kind of in the middle. It could be telling a story of like, it could be able to be telling going up and going down, like tarot. Sometimes I think tarot is very much where you could actually see symbolism depending on which way you're going.
Yes.
on the tree. So I'm wondering if like maybe you're seeing kind of like the same thing here with this.
No, I totally, I'm on that train that you're talking about. I'm totally, because, you know, Buddhism is really about the middle pillar. Obviously, Tantra has different, there are 7 stages of Indian Tantra. So the schools that still exist. So after you get to the 5th stage, it's all Vamacharya. And everyone thinks that they're a left-hand path master now. I sort of realized this online. I didn't really know this. I was very like naive in a way, and I kept myself very naive. I'm sure you're familiar with that technique. It can be a very good alchemical tool to just be naive of things and not really read text, right?
It's happened to me.
You know, and you just sort of don't know, and you keep yourself stupid because it can help you in a specific way navigate certain spheres or certain things that you're doing, because you can get there through ignorance sometimes, at least the first try. You can get there through ignorance one time at least.
After a while, it's not an excuse anymore. Yeah.
Exactly.
I know what you mean, yeah. Yes.
But, you know, left-hand practices are much, I think that they just really are not the same thing. I think when people hear it in Tantra, it's really not the same thing of contemporary like esotericism. It doesn't have the same meanings. I know that a lot of Western occultists are very into the Buddhism or into the Indian Tantra, but I really would say that it has a different meaning. There's a different kind of like worldview, different cosmology, and the reasons why you would do it is also different. So I think that she is kind of the goddess who directs us one path to the other, but always kind of reminds us to like come back into the middle, because that's what the mantra marga, the path of the mantra, when you recite the mantras, it's to rectify the middle pillar. It's not to go play over here or go to this extreme over here. It's really to bring it into the middle and to rectify our sins that we've done, just like she kind of creates the world and also destroys the world in one way of thinking. I think that she's telling us to like create and destroy ourselves. And it's like right. And also she births the dragon. So when we get to him, you'll see him and you'll be like, oh, she didn't birth him. And so she didn't birth him in like the narrative story, but in one way you could think of it as that the dragon realizes that she's the OG. The dragon respects her. So the dragon might respond to the power of the male deities, but he is himself a Shakta Tantra. Well, in Buddhism, we say he's a Buddhist, but in Shakta Tantra, he is a Shakta Tantra. So he respects the goddess the most. So she is the only one who can really tame him properly. Okay. So the male gods could slay him, and obviously he comes back to life because Vishnu reincarnates, but she is able to use his power. And in my kind of, the way I think about it is the dragon is like magic, but the dragon's also inside of us. So it's like our divine spark, as well as like the impetus to go higher, sometimes for better or for worse. But it's just one way I think about it. We can go on to the next one, MYP, when you're ready.
Sure, let's do it.
So then you see her, this is when she appears fully at Netzach as herself. So this what we would call Chandika. So it means the shining golden one. So, and you can see the dragon is at her feet, and she's kind of, you can't really tell, but she's giving like a boon giving gesture, and kind of he's drinking in the blood as also breathing out the flames of creation. So he's doing that. And then this is kind of like the idea of the Jambu Vipa, the world island with the great tower or the great tree. Sometimes it's depicted differently. It depends. But that's just like so people can see it. Like visually, there's 4 quadrants, just like Malkuth. And there's like a tower in the middle on a platform that can turn either clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on your perspective.
You know, even when you get into Netzach, you know, like sometimes people can attribute, well, I mean, you can attribute Venus to it, or people will attribute like Lucifer, even though it's on, you know, it's a female kind of image on the right pillar, which is interesting to begin with. I sometimes like the glowing. in my opinion, that would be the Lucifer part of it. It's actually like kind of like the light that, like if you switched on a light bulb, the light that is actually shining outside of the glass, that would maybe be kind of kind of the Luciferic part of it. Would be what's shining outside of the light bulb.
So I think you'll really like this. So in Vedic astrology, the Venus is ruled by an asura. So like the planetary gods, so they're very minor in Tantra, generally, obviously except for the dragon, but they are the grasping planets. That's what they're called. It's called the Navgraha, so the 9 graspers. So you could say they're like archons in a way. So he is represented by a diamond. That is his gemstone in Jyotish. So you could say when he shines, and he also turns counterclockwise, and Venus is also turns, well, they say, I don't know whether space is real or not. I'm very flexible with those things. It doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that they say that Venus turns counterclockwise. Venus is ruled by an asura, so an anti-god. I think that's very interesting. But I do agree with you. I think that the godhead of the sphere takes that form. Like, I think that makes sense to me. Whether she appears in more of an outer form or more of an inner form, I definitely think it's like a female-oriented sphere.
Yeah, do you ever see like waterfalls that like will kind of like the water will come out and spill into one, and then we'll go into another one and go into another one?
Yes.
Sometimes I kind of like look at the tree in that sense, and I would think like kind of like once you start getting to like that energy of going outside of the boundaries that you're in, you start kind of like maybe pouring out into the next cup down. If you're coming into form. If not, I think you'd be going up. That's why I even think like the star card in the Golden Dawn deck that I have, I do think as silly as it sounds, just because it looks like she's pouring it one way doesn't mean that the water could be going a different direction.
Well, that's also very interesting because when we get to Chesed or Tara, her name means star. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And she is the mother of the milk ocean. So she is the one who creates, or you could say, I sort of think of it as she affixes things into reality, suspends them in like a liquid solution. That's kind of where my thinking goes, because her story is that she breastfeeds. So Shiva gets poisoned. They're churning the waters of the supernal ocean. Okay. The poison comes out. Shiva drinks it. She manifests as Tara. She breastfeeds Shiva, and he turns into a little boy. So that is kind of where her power is. She's the salvatrix. She's the savioress. She's the star that appears after the storm.
That's so like really interesting, that whole what you just said with because like that goes into so many things, like tarot. There's a star card, and there's always like a female involved with that. I mean, even the way you're explaining it seemed very Nuit, like, for Crowley. So it seems to have its impact in a lot of things, the female and the star.
No, I totally agree. But you could also think of them as all being the star. You could think of all the goddesses, because when there's another form that the goddess can take.
Oh, I think they might all be explaining the same thing, just in a different character or a different name. You know what I'm saying?
100%. No, that's what I really think. I think of it as more expanding outwards into the tree or expanding outwards into the mandala. But it's really one person. It's really one figure. Mm-hmm. And it's just how she can manifest, or they can manifest, or God can manifest, whatever you want to call it. And they manifest in specific ways so we can understand. But we also have to remember not to be so limited by our like conception of form. So I think that's another thing that she kind of says. She teaches us to be flexible in our understanding. But there's another form that she can take, which is more exterior when she's at Netzach. And she can ride a lion, or she can ride a tiger. And then her name is Durga. So I think she's really interesting. And I always hear you talk about how you used to, when you used to play in Netzach a little bit, that the Egyptian goddess would ride a bull. Well, Durga slays an asura. So Durga slays an anti-god who is a buffalo demon. So I think I've always found that very interesting.
Buffalo demon. Yeah. Do you want me to go on to the next one?
Yes, totally. Let's go on to the next one.
Go for it. Here we go.
So there you see this is Durga. So the more exterior goddess, and then you can see her slaying the buffalo demon in the second image. So she's riding her lion. The lion is also very interesting because the lion is the words, so the logos of all the Puranas.
You know what's interesting? Like that even goes with Tiferet, and there's like a lot of the color. Like I can see that matching. It's interesting.
Well, she is. They do say that she is the blazing of 10,000 suns. So there you go. There's a little. But this other image is the 9 forms of Durga. So this is a more older form of understanding Durga, specifically expanding into her own mandala 8 times. So you could say it also like that. So there's also a way to map the Nav Durgas onto a tree, which I've also done, but I won't get into that. But it's you end up with a kind of a different formulation. So the goddesses, it doesn't like match the Mahavijjas 1-to-1, but maybe you think of it as like, this is how they can sort of manifest into the tree at different yugas or different times of like our cycle. Anyways, you can go on to the next one. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, not at all. Not at all. This is, I don't know much about any of this stuff.
So this is Rahula. So he is the dragon or the beast, if you want to say that. So in Buddhism, so this is a secret information, but I'm just going to say, because I've already said it on a different episode, but Rahula is Vishnu. So in the higher tantras of the dragon, he is equated with Vishnu. So the story is Vishnu chops Rahula's head off during that same episode of the churning of the supernal waters, even though Rahu did the right thing and sort of saved the universe. Vishnu doesn't want him to drink the nectar or the amrita of the gods. Rahu thinks he deserves it, so he lines up. He sits in between the sun and the moon, and through the light of both the sun and the moon, his magic kind of shows that he's half dragon, half demon. So then so Vishnu says, you're not supposed to be here. He throws his Sudarshana chakra, which is the 6-pointed star. It's from Shiva's insides. Shiva took his own chakras that he had purified all the elements with, gave it to Vishnu. Vishnu uses it as a weapon, decapitates him. His head falls on the ground, but he's already drinking the nectar of the gods. So he's actually immortal. And when his head falls on the ground, all poisonous medicinal plants grow. So things like aconite or tobacco or anything like that, anything that's toxic and medicinal, that is kind of like his purview. So he's considered to be the god of eclipses. His tail is obviously because his head and his tail were separated. So his head, he has all the 9 heads of the planets, but his tail is actually a subtle body, so a smoky body. So this will obviously be more important when we get to Chokmah, but the smoky tail of the dragon is a shadow planet, so it's considered to be the south node of the moon. So the tail is what eclipses the sun, and the head, which is the physical body, is what eclipses the moon. But it also can stand in the chart, like, so people can have their own birth chart, and you can have the 2 dragon planets, so the north and south node of the moon, can appear in any of the 12 mansions. So he can also block the regular planets as well. But he is considered to be like he's like the god of desire. He's not a bad guy. Because he is a Buddha. He was subjugated by the Tantric Buddha. But he's also like the demonic, not demonic like demon, but like daemonic representation of the shadow armies of the planets and the stars sometimes. So I think that's very interesting. And then the next image is Shiva. So this is Sada Shiva. So this is him just meditating on Mount Kailash. So he has like a mountain that really exists, and he supposedly sits on the top of it, and he's just meditating. So this is more of a normative Hindu image, but I think it's a really good image just so you can see like Shiva is always depicted with his eyes closed. And the river Ganga, so the celestial river, flows down over the moon on his crown and it cools off his kind of fiery nature. Because Shiva is a more recent innovation. He used to be called Rudra. So anyone who's ever read the Vedas will obviously know Rudra. Rudra is like a storm god, a god of lightning. And so Shiva is then syncretized and with Rudra, and then later called just Shiva. So we can move on to the next one, but I think that's a pretty good explanation for those.
You noticed was that like animal skin, I guess?
Okay, so he sits on the tiger skin. So that means he has overcome all his fear. And he also rides the white bull, so the Nandi bull. So that can also be the wish-granting bull. So there's another bull that has like a sphinx kind of look with a woman's face, and that can be considered the wish-granting bull. But he rides Nandi bull, so it can be. So Headless talked about this the last time he was on, but the Shiva Lingam, like how they would do Shiva Puja in India, they have like a black basalt stone with 3 lines on it, and then they pour milk over the top. So you could say that the bull sort of fulfills the function of ritual worship for Shiva. He also wears the snake. He also wears a dragon king around his neck. So that's actually very important. So people can remember. His name is Vasuki.
Yeah, I've often wondered, showing the skin. Is that even like representation, like dead to the flesh, or like skinwalking, or a skinwalker?
So I tend to agree with you that I definitely think it has, okay, so if you're like a forest ascetic and you're sitting there and you see like a tiger and it's coming for you and then you manage to slay it, that would be, you could say that that's also a metaphor for your own fear. And you could also say, because sometimes they will also have like a leopard skin. So you'll see sometimes the yoginis, not the main goddesses, but the yogini entourage goddesses, they will wear leopard skins. So the leopard skin means you've overcome bliss. So when you're performing like wrathful practices on the cremation ground, and sometimes that is the real cremation ground. Sometimes it's not just a conceptual one. So instead of being overtaken with the left-hand practices, like with blood drinking or whatever the conceptual idea is, and losing themselves in the ecstasy of the moment, when they wear the leopard skin, that means they're fully in control of themselves at all times. So I think that's also an interesting way. Sometimes you also see Shiva wearing the leopard skin. And Alexander the Great did call Shiva the Indian Pan. So I think that's also interesting that they seem to have like a connection in that way.
Oh, okay. Go on to the next one. Here we go.
So this is like I called it the Holy Family because I thought that was like a funny way to describe it. But you can see so Shiva, as I said, he's really an ascetic. So he becomes a householder when they are married. So when they are married, he's a householder, but generally she gets very annoyed with him because he's always hanging out with ghosts and demons and vampires and all of those, like cremation ground, like the hosts is what it's called, the ganas. So he's always hanging out with them. He's never really at home. So she has to also be kind of like she has to kind of pull everything together. So she creates, so you see she's holding Ganesha, which is the elephant-headed sun. She creates him through like an alchemical process. You can maybe say even that he's a homunculus in a way of speaking. But, and then that's the god Skanda. So that's the god with the sphere, the other little boy. But they actually have more children. They have a daughter, the 2 daughters, and you can see also their mounts, the lion and the bull. So I always think that's really interesting because when you add in Skanda rides the peacock and Ganesh rides the mouse. So then you could also say that's like a 4-animal kind of alchemical combination. And then the picture on the right is like the cosmology in like a more Buddhist way of thinking, but you can see how the sun and the moon are on their own axis and they kind of rotate around the island. So I always thought that was really interesting when I heard different people kind of like describe how space is fake. Just that we kind of have that same idea. And then also Sirius B, so the star like right in between the 2 mountains is like a green star. So I think that's really interesting when you look at like the color of Tippereth as well as the color of the goddess who's said to sit there. So I just think that's interesting. But you can see that there's overlap between, so basically how it breaks it down is into the 3 world system. So there's a heaven, hell, and earth. So there's bleed in with the 3, you could say there's bleed in with the lower heavens and the upper hells with our world. So there's like ability to kind of traverse those 3 kind of planes of existence, you could say. Oh, and I just want to say this. Sometimes people will say that like being born on the material plane is bad, but really in like the dharmic religions, whether it's Tantra or not Tantra, it's actually not bad. This is where we come to reset our karma, as well as we are able to kind of ascend the mountain, ascend the tree from this point. So this is kind of the optimum for us because we get to decide where we want to go.
Yeah, I think we, and I do think you're right. I think we actually have a choice. Do you think on the left, that picture on the left, to me, I mean, some with the animals, it almost seems like the depiction of size is completely off. Like,
100%.
Yeah, I mean, you think that has like something to do with it? I mean, and was that dude on the left? I mean, it looks like he's got a carpet on his back or some shit. It's like, well, I'm wondering like the color. I mean, that I don't know what that color is. Maybe purple or close to it. That could be like royalty, but like maybe all that the size and the color might mean something.
So I would say that the red refers to the blood red ocean. So so her story as a goddess is that she dies for various reasons. She's reincarnated. She gets married to Shiva. Shiva doesn't want her. So she has to learn the Vamacharya, the wrathful left-hand practices. She has to go to the cremation ground on her own accord and learn how to kind of rectify the world, we could say. So I agree with you, though, that the size thing is very interesting. And I do think that definitely, well, and you could also say it's the categorization of the, like how I said, the lion is the logos. Mm-hmm. So the bull, you could also say the bull is also like the Vedas. Or you could say the bull is maybe the Upanishads. And then you could say the lion is the Purana. So the Puranas are considered to be less, they're important, but they're not as considered important. Now, if you're a tantric, then the Puranas are going to be very important because they really relate a kind of remixed, more tantric. They have more twilight language, more ways to understand the secret meaning than the Vedas. The Vedas are much more dense, right? So you could say that that's what the size difference is. But I also think that there is like a size difference. Like I'm not like a giant person, like where I like know about the giants and, that's not my specialty, but I definitely think that there's something there. And I think that the younger gods definitely appear a lot smaller, a lot more human size, because Shiva has actually another son who's not pictured here, and he rides tiger, like that's his mount is tigers. He's depicted as about human proportionality to the tigers. So I can totally understand what you're saying. And Ganesh, the elephant-headed guy, when he rides his rat, either the rat is like massive or the rat is like really small and he's like riding it, but he's like, there's still like a proportionality. So even though it's like a rat, you could say maybe he's very small. So I definitely think there's something.
You see the next to the guy's foot, who's do those look like, what would you consider those, like almost like sandal type things? Maybe?
Yes.
See, like I even find that interesting. That even goes with Hode. Sandals go with Hode and Tahuti. So
yes,
is that even like a reference right there? There's like a commonality.
Yeah, he's saying that he's becoming a householder. He's taking off his shoes before he enters the house. Mm. So So when Shiva feels trapped whenever he's as a householder. His true desire is to abandon material creation, regardless of his role in creating it or not, and to go meditate. He really is the true ascetic of the path. He doesn't want to have relations. He doesn't want to, he doesn't really want any part of it. It's her that keeps waking him up.
Oh.
So you could say that when he takes off his sandals, he's ready to be like fully in the household. And if we look at the Tantric conception of Hod, he is sleeping in Hod. So when we go there, you'll see she's on top of his corpse. She arises from his navel. So I do think that there's something there. Maybe I'm not quite like fully as good as you in understanding, but I definitely think there's something there.
I find it interesting how you said that he's willing to just like leave and like meditate. Like he's willing to give everything up. It's very like almost like I think crossing the abyss, you know, in a sense. If there is if there's a death and a rebirth literally going on in a sense, I mean, you are kind of giving up this reality for a second. So
no, that's exactly what he does. And when he appears as Panchamukha Shiva, the Shiva with 5 heads, if you see the head on the top of his head is facing upwards. So that's the head that breathes out ether. So it speaks the words of either, whatever that is. And its eyes are closed. And so you could also say it's pushing above the supernal ocean. So it's like kind of the only head that reaches the surface of the higher ocean.
And you mentioned before that it's her that brings him back a lot too.
Pardon, say that again?
You said it was her that makes him like, it's kind of like she's the reason of him coming back, correct?
Well, that is, so you can absolutely say in one way of thinking, because this is Tantra, it's like everything is a paradox, right? Everything's a paradox. Everything has its contradictions. It's like very dialectical. Everything's in relationship with each other. And so you could say that she brings him in every time that she feels like she needs him. But then we also remember that she is also the whole thing. So does she really need him? So I think, but he is also time. But she can also be time. When she manifests as the 10 goddesses, she can be manifestations of specific times in the story of creation and destruction.
I know I've often thought like, I mean, I'll use Megadeth as an example, Mary Jane, but I do think there's a lot of love songs out there that are actually explaining what you're talking about, the whole occult aspect, that it's like, you know, the love of that feminine energy is like what it's kind of is making this reality happen. I think in a sense, you know.
No, I totally agree with you. I think that's, I
mean, like
that's
they're acknowledging
it's
the feminine energy that is, you know, making this, you know, whatever.
I mean, she is the beauty of the world. She's also the horrifying nature of the world. She's also like the ability to traverse the spheres, traverse the tree. She gives us like a lot. Like it's like she's a very important player in the game. And if you look at it through Shakta Tantra, she is the most important player in the game. And Buddhist Tantra also considers her an extremely important character. And when we do the spheres, everybody will also see that. And she's just inseparable from the story, especially for magicians.
I think if you took a look at the song Mary Jane, I think people could see that, like, this is just my theory on what Dave Mustaine was getting at, if I'm correct. I think, like, he's acknowledging even the fact that, like, it's the feminine energy that you're in love with that keeps bringing you back from the abyss into the flesh. And it's more of almost like a torment and being pissed the fuck off, knowing that that's what keeps doing. Almost. It's, if you look at it the way that he's talking about it, that's how I see it.
No, so, I mean, I will.
So like when I'm saying like love songs, it could be, you know, it could be so many different ways. I think he could be saying it, but I do think.
No, I totally agree. I didn't know if I was going to say this, but I'll just say it. I know that like a lot of the other occult researchers like Michael Tessarion, he does not like the female principle. He's very anti. I'm not making a judgment on that, but I'm just saying that I think that this is another layer that is very, I think it's
playing more on the beast side than the Scarlet Horse side. You know?
Exactly. But the reality is like we cannot manifest things into material reality or spiritual reality without her. Like, she's just so important to the game.
Well,
and she also teaches us how to like escape the game.
That's what I was
in
like
the tantric way.
Trying to get at before, like when I was talking about how I think some depictions can show either going up or down. I think you will have like the story of like kind of the male energy and the female form or the female energy. You will see like depictions of them like neither coming together or going apart or whatever, and going up or down. So like I think like basically what I'm trying to get at is that you will see going up the tree the right way, both sides start to work along with each other.
100%.
Without birthing something down to Malkuth.
No, you're totally right. I mean, it's dialectical alchemy, right?
Yeah.
It's the left hand and the right hand conjoining to create something in the center and through the center pillar. Because each pillar can also be understood as like the blue pillar as tamas, so sin, the center pillar as sattva, purity, and the red pillar as rajas, which is like desire. So you could understand it's the rectification of the outer pillars into the center pillar. So when we saw the image of Chamunda, the goddess of the matrikas, the Pleiades, she is the one who's the descending goddess, the descending force that falls from the sky as the red star onto the Chipolithic tree at the very bottom. And then she has to kind of arise forth from, whatever reason she had for falling. She kind of realizes that she has to like get herself together and pick herself up. And in fact, in the Indian story, her body, physical body, is divided into 51 pieces. So different temples were built on different, what is said to be fallen pieces. So there are 51 temples that are called Shakti Peeths, which are obviously that.
51, that's interesting. A lot of 15s lately. I've been mentioning that. All right, do you want me to go on to the next one?
Yeah, let's go on to the next one.
Sure. Let's see. This might be like one of the last few before you get into the tree. And you know what? I think that when we get up to the tree, we'll end it there and we'll continue that in part 2.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you.
So this, no problem. Thank you. So this is the Yogini temple. These are it's a grouping of temples. They're all hypaethral, meaning that they don't have roofs. This one is a 64 Yogini temple, Choseth, the Yogini in Sanskrit. So this is in Madhya Pradesh. So it's also the temple that probably was the inspiration for Indian Parliament, because we know the 2 British architects were Freemasons. They would go out to this temple, which is kind of out in the middle of nowhere on a plateau. And you can see, if you look at pictures of Indian Parliament, there's a definite similarity. So this one has the 64 goddesses of the Pleiades, but they're also Mahavidyas and they're also Matrikas. So you can see where the whole grouping was a singular grouping at one time. And then in the central shrine, so now it is a Shiva image, but perhaps in the older times it was Chamunda, so the queen of the Matrikas. So these temples would have been for Vamacharya practices. That doesn't necessarily mean like bad things happening. It just means that they were probably doing like corpse sadhana, sometimes like sexual tantra, but again, I don't like to talk about that. It's not that I don't like to talk about it. It's just that people way overemphasize it and they get very stuck on those ritual things that are like it's really like a ritual procedure. So people should just think of it like that. It's not really, those are not standalones. It's not just do whatever you want. It's like you follow the shastras, you follow the ritual procedures that are laid out in the text. It's a hermeneutic process. So I just want to say that, because people always ask about sex tantra, and really that's not my thing, but it is real. But anyways, these were temples that they would practice like left hand practices and sexual tantra, but it wasn't like degenerate necessarily. As from what the history that exists, it wasn't degenerate, and a lot of the temples were had different schools around them that would focus on different So there are different goddesses that you could place as the center figure, even in the 10 Mahavijja system. Like there are different schools that focus on different goddesses. So you could also say that that was going on at this time as well. So I just think it's really important, like cool to see, because the city, like the fort is kind of like a mandala, but like a physical mandala. So how we would draw a mandala to like worship in Buddhism, this is like a physical example of like, they're all the star goddesses, they're facing the inner shrine. You go through them counterclockwise and you worship each one, and then you go into the central shrine and then you worship the main deity. So I just think it's a really cool way to like kind of see them in a physical kind of conceptualization.
Even looking at it, it kind of, to me, I mean, I think it looks like an eyeball.
I knew you were going to say that when I was sending them to you. And I also thought it's quite interesting because when you look at it like from the aerial view, it is like on a platform, and the dakinis were said to descend down from the sky into the center. So it could be like, and the dakinis are all different colors, right? So you could say it is like how the eye perceives all the different kinds of cones and rods and the colors that we see.
Well, I was going to say, like, if you, this may sound silly, but if you want to think of, like, I do think a lot of stuff sexual is kind of more of just more of occult symbolism. If you want to start thinking about making your pupil dilate, or you get bigger or smaller, your hyaloid canal and basically your pupil, it's going to like look like kind of retracting and going forward.
Yes.
It would be either straight, or then when it pulled back, it would be an S. Almost like, tell you the truth, basically like a snake attacking.
Yes.
I could see that pumping, and then there's also water in the beginning part of your eye. It's more of the aqueous humor. That's like really water before you hit like the stuff that has blood in the back of your eye. I mean, you're even, and then when your pupil moves and does all that shit, you are actually moving the waters. The waters are moving too. So you got like, if you want to think of a visual and maybe pervert it a little bit, and you're thinking of like your pupil and your hyaloid canal pumping in and out, and those water moving and everything's going. I mean, you could see maybe how there's a sexual innuendo in there as well.
No, and I totally agree. And I've heard you say many times that like you think that the sexual stuff sometimes with Crowley, and I'm not like super versed on the Crowley and stuff.
I'm not even so much sticking up for him, just in general.
Yeah. I totally agree with you that I think it's misunderstood. The sexual stuff is misunderstood, and I think it's not necessarily the obvious thing. And so in Tantra there is a dialectic. It's inner, outer, secret. So the inner
that's very Kabbalistic too. That right there, the inner robe of glory and the outer robe of glory. Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't know that, so I learned something new.
Yeah, that would be Chakma and Binah. Chakma would be the inner robe, and Binah would be the outer robe of glory.
Oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Well, you'll see when we get there that that actually fits. So, also, I think it's interesting the hypaethral, because it's like the stars. But then also, like, what is a sadhana? Like, what is a practice? So it is the color, it is the light, it is the sound, it is the gross and subtle speech, and as well as, what is the other thing? I'm missing something. Sound, color, speech. Yeah, sound, color, speech, two things.
Smell.
Oh, so the sense can be very important, but the gross senses are not. They're considered to be like a separate kind of. They're called the Panchabhuta, so the 5 ghosts.
Oh.
So they are very important, but they're considered like a separate thing. But when you're doing a sadhana, it has to comprise of light, color, sound, speech, and I'm missing one, but I'll think of it. I'm sorry. Well, anyways, let's keep going. Let's finish this one, and then if I think of it, I'll say it. But there's a 5th one I was just thinking about, because I listened to you a couple days ago, and you were talking about like what does a spell comprise, and what, like when we watch Like I don't watch any media pretty much. I just watch like Asian movies. So for me, I try and stay away from anything that like can have kind of like subversive or occulted meanings, we'll say. So, but you can instantly recognize even in that formulation that like a movie or a film or a TV show is like the perfect medium to create like a spell, just in the tantric conception. Because what is like a film? It's like sound, light, color. Oh, I remember the fifth one. It's the perception. It's the viewer.
It's a moving.
So
it's a moving tantra. It's a moving talisman. If you think
yes,
it could be.
Yes, no, 100%, and it requires. That's the fifth thing is the viewer. That's what Tara is. It's the perception of the exploding star. It's us perceiving the things that we're seeing outwardly. So, and that's exactly what a film requires. A film requires a viewer, whether they understand it or not. Anyways, I just thought that was interesting. So this is the Mahavijja. So this is the 10 goddesses, the grouping. So you see in the central position, they have Tripura Sundari, Lalita Tripura Sundari. So she in this grouping is called the Sri Vidya. So this is a specific school of Tantra where they place Lalita Tripura Sundari, so the goddess of Hod. She is the goddess of the whole thing in this conception, okay? Although they've also given Hod her own goddess, and you can see her. She's almost at the bottom. She's the little girl. So when she's the little girl, that can also, but that's her direct emanation. So that's called Bala Tripura Sundari. So that's when she takes form to play in her own creation through innocence. So she does not necessarily understand all the things in the universe, but she takes a childlike form so she can enjoy all the things in the universe. So I find that's interesting. Anyways, so then the next one is Kali Kola. So this is where Kali is the primary goddess of the 10. But people often get hung up on Kali because of many reasons, which we won't get into this time. But you can also think of them as all Tara as well. Like that's a more Buddhist conception, but like Tara can also be a central figure. And then they all could be a central figure, and they all can be your Ishtadevata. So you don't have to have the central deity be your personal deity, but you'll have to maneuver through all of them to understand all of them, if that makes sense.
No, I get that for sure. Is the next one? Is this one starting the tree? I think now.
So this is the really important thing. This is the Sri Chakra. So when you look at the three-dimensional image of the image on the right, it looks just like a Metatron's cube.
Yeah.
Like when you look at it in three-dimensional. And so there are different, and I've heard many people describe like the crystallization process that takes place either at Saturn or Binah, if you want to describe it like that. And Kali, obviously I've placed her in Binah, so maybe you could say that she is the crystallizing force. I don't personally think she's as crystallized. Like I think the Western esotericism places more emphasis on Binah as the crystallizing sphere. I don't disagree with that. I just think that there's more to the process than that. And I think that she has more different qualities than is necessarily assigned to that sphere usually. So I think it's interesting to talk about, but also the sphere can be said to be birthed by Lalita Tripura Sundari, so the goddess that appears at Hod. And it can also be the sphere that appears at Netzach. And it can also be the sphere that appears at Kether. So or the shape. So it's kind of like, well, one way to think of it is called the garden of lotus seeds. So the bijas. So bijas are like magical words, we'll say, that every goddess is assigned a specific bija. So just like when we are at Malkuth and we're the bride or the householder or the child even, and we're learning all the things in the universe. So we learn the bijas. We don't necessarily have them bloomed. So so you will often see goddesses will often hold a lotus flower. So Tara holds a blue lotus. She's not the only one, but sometimes they will hold lotuses that are not bloomed. So that's really important to understand, like what their individual bija is, and then also like how to kind of align your will with their will. Like what kinds of things can you do in that sphere? It kind of, all the images kind of have like I said, like an inner outer secret meaning. So you can kind of like, perceive beyond the veil. So you could say that each of the spheres is the syllables of the Sanskrit alphabet. So that's one way to think of it.
I like that.
So we can go on to the next one, and we'll just start that. And then if you want to call it, we'll call it.
Okay.
So these are the yantras. So every goddess also has a yantra. So it's like a geometric shape, obviously, with the triangles. Some of the triangles are upward facing, some of them are downward facing. There's a different number of triangles. Now, I will say in Buddhism, these are not necessarily the one-to-one triangles that we would use. However, I found this image, I thought it was actually generally quite good, because you have to be really careful. It's not quite like, like you mentioned the Stephen Skinner book. It's not like just going and photocopying that and then, fixing the seals in the specific way. It's not really like that. You have to really understand the modes of worship. But in an esoteric, in a more inner way of looking at the yantras, is that these are like the goddesses in their subtle forms. So they're spiritual forms. So you could worship every yantra as if it were the goddess herself. So if you don't have a statue or you didn't have a thing, and often in the south of India, they will affix the different yantras for the different goddesses underneath the statue. So that could said to be the generating force of the spirit of that inhabits the statue. So I think that's really interesting.
I like how these look very much like the chakra.
So they're definitely related, and they definitely, you could say that like the whole point of working the Mahavijjas is to then awaken the Kundalini and like have liberation once you activate the chakra at the very top. However, in Shakta Tantra specifically, your soteriological goals are not necessarily liberation for ejection. You're more looking at constant contact with the Godhead at all times, ability to interact with the Godhead at all times, not necessarily them speaking to you, but just like subtle signs in the universe you understand as directly having meaning for you. And then also like you're able to manifest things through that specific goddess's sphere, whatever you want really, if you've mastered the sphere. And then also to like attain all the spiritual powers that are available in that sphere or by that goddess. So that's more the soteriological goal for that. So that's why you could say they're like chakras, but they're also like more than chakras, because you could also say the planets are like chakras and the goddesses rule, like every goddess is assigned a planet that they are said to like rule. So they don't really appear in the planetary, like they're not as connected to the worldlier things. They're definitely more of a greater force, of a greater God in their spheres. So you could say they're greater than the chakras, but they definitely have an interrelationship.
Yeah, I was going to say, just going by the symbolism that's used in these and the chakras, I mean, there obviously has to be some sort of correlation. That's why I liked it, because like you could definitely tell they're probably pulling off of like the same ideas and stuff.
100%. I mean, it's all building off like the Atharvadas, like the magical texts of the Vedas that, that it's a little more nihilistic. Like if you're reading the Atharvadas, this gives you more of like, it introduces the idea of like the Godhead as both internal, external, and secret. Like there's a Godhead that exists outside of you too. It's not just inside of you. So that's the Atharvadas are more, sometimes people have taken it and it can become very solipsistic or very narcissistic. I've heard a lot of occultists being like, oh, there's nothing. It's like very nihilistic. I'm the God. But really, this is a lot more subtle kind of way of understanding. Mm-hmm. So I think that they take the form, like the flesh form away, so you can worship the yantra without being so focused on, the worldly things that we've assigned. So we're like taking away all those assignations. We're taking away their qualities. And we're just looking at what is left. Like, let's see the Godhead in their full form. It's not as humanized.
You know, it's not humanized. It hasn't turned into a character.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I know what you're getting at. I know what you're definitely getting at. And now, was that the last one before we get into... No, we have another one. We have this.
So this is Ganesh. So he is really important. He's really important in both Indian Tantra and Buddhist Tantra, depending on your school of Buddhism. But he has 32 forms, like we said. He also has a form called Maharakta Ganapati, which has 22 arms. So I just think he's really interesting. He also has a lot of Ahriman-like qualities. He can ride on Rahu's back. And in an astrological way, he is said to be able to clear the smoke. So the smoky tail of the dragon, he is said to clear the smoke from the paths. So not necessarily the spheres, but the paths between the spheres, like you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So that's what his astrological power is. Sometimes people will say, oh, he's the god of Mercury, like he subjugates Mercury if you have a negative Mercury in your chart, but that's not really true. It's really Ketu. So people want the real Jyotish correspondence. That's what he sort of subjugates, but he doesn't clear it all the way. So once we get into Chokma, you'll understand what I'm saying with that he clears the smoky tail, but he clears the smoky tail from below. So let's say you're below Tippereth, he clears the smoke from those paths, but he doesn't do it necessarily when you're above the supernal ocean or above the higher waters. But he appears there. So I'll just say he appears there, and he can appear also in tantric forms because people always see him and he's just an elephant-headed god and he looks like kind of silly as like a little kid sometimes is often how they depict him. But there's actually like a tantric meaning to that too, just like we talked about with Bala Tripura Sundari, where she takes the form of a child to play in her own creation. You could also say that Ganesh also takes the form as a child to play in his own creation and also makes his mother happy. So she kind of softens in all of her spheres, like the sphere of, and the goddess of Chokma, she's extremely ferocious. She's like an outcast goddess. And he can exist in that sphere as a very tantric deity, as a very tantric, like a left-handed deity. So then it kind of softens her presence when he's there. So he's considered to be like the guardian of the gate. So he is the gross speech of the mantra. So you cannot even really begin doing a mantra practice if you do not like at least acknowledge him. So I'll just say that.
Okay. That's well said.
So that's why he's important, right? Like we just have to acknowledge him, and then whether you have a practice with him or not, his tantric practice didn't really survive into the contemporary time. But I will say there's something interesting about him is that some of the richest families in India now have Ganesh as their Kola Deva, so their clan deities. And they are also of the merchant caste. So he's considered to be like a very mercantile god. So he's the god of obstacles. He can place obstacles before you as well as take them away.
Very interesting. All right. All right. This would be getting into it. So I guess that was the last one before we got into the spheres, correct?
That sounds good.
All right. Awesome. Yo, thank you very much, man. That was a lot. That was a lot for me. Thank you.
I know. Okay. Well, thank you.
I'm not
so
complaining.
much,
I'm not complaining. I think this was great.
Okay, awesome. Good.
No, I'm glad I had the idea of doing two, because beforehand, when you sent me the stuff and I was looking at it, I was like, there's a lot here. So I think this worked out perfect. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I wanted you to see the colors. I know it was a lot of pictures and stuff, but
that's great though. That's great.
Part of it, right? Like you have to see it to know if I'm telling the truth or I'm just like bullshitting.
No, I think it's great. The visuals really help with something like this. Hopefully, maybe in the second part, we will get Headless on with us. We were supposed to have him on tonight, but something came up, I guess, and he was not able to join us. So, yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get Headless on for part 2 when we get into the actual Tree of Life.
Okay, well, thank you so much, MYP. It was really cool. It was really fun to pick your brain and hear what you thought of my kind of project I've been doing. And yeah,
no, I thought that was great. I thought that was really good. Very interesting too. You know, and like the colors and a lot of the numbers, it's like the same. I see the correlation. It's a lot of the same things you get over and over again. You know.
No, I totally agree, and I think it just is. It's like different enough from the Egyptian stuff that I think it's kind of new. Like I think it's fresh in a way. That's how I felt about it. I was like, oh, this is kind of different because I'm really bad at the other pantheons.
No, this is very interesting. This is all new to me, so I appreciate the schooling. You want to let everybody know what your deal is again and where they can find some of your stuff?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter, Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn. I'm on Instagram, Threshold Saints, which will be the name of my RSS feed when that drops eventually. We're still working on it. I've done 11 episodes on this subject on subconscious realms, so people can check that out. I was just on an episode of Deplorable Janet. Nice. I have a series on Who Killed Tupac Shakur. I'm going to be, I think that's it. That's on Union of Unknowns. Shout out to nice. Ashley. And yeah, I think that's it. But I actually am missing something, but I totally forgot. So it's okay. But
well, after the show, I'll get any of the links that you want me to share. I know you do have some social media. If you're willing to share that, I can also
of course
pass that along. The links for the Spiritual Gangsters, the other show that I am doing now, as it seems to be going forward live every Tuesday. So check that out, and the links are in there. You will have to catch that live on the Spiritual Gangsters itself, not on my feed. So check the link in the bottom. That will be in the link tree. And the NY Patriot show, the other show that I have besides the Occult Rejects, the links for that are in the bottom and all the social media for both accounts. And like I said before, Jin's stuff will be in there as well. Again, Jin, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.